What's going on here? Who is this woman?
You should calm down. You are embarrassing my guest.
Embarrassing? You're the one who brought her here.
You will have to stay in the basement. My new woman will be moving in.
Stop joking, babe. You can't be serious. You are doing this in front of our kids?
No, Dad, you don't get to talk to Mom like that. After everything she has done for this family.
Dad, how could you bring another woman into our home? You are hurting Mommy.
I see you both don't have respect for me anymore.
You don't get to talk to her like that. Pierce said it, standing between his father and his mother, his voice cracking in the middle because he was still 17 and still learning how to sound like a man when it mattered. Byung-jin turned to look at his son, like he hadn't expected the boy to have a spine. "Sit down," Byung-jin said. "No," Pandora said it before her brother could answer. She was already on her feet too, her arms crossed, her eyes moving between her father and the woman standing beside him in their dining room, like she belonged there. "You brought her here, into Mum's house, and you want us to sit down and watch you humiliate her?" The woman beside Byung-jin, blonde, poised, clearly rehearsed for this moment, said nothing. She didn't need to. Byung-jin had already done the talking for her, walking into the penthouse he shared with his wife of 19 years, and introducing another woman to his children like she was a business associate he wanted them to remember the name of. Estella stood at the head of the table, where she'd been setting plates for dinner. She hadn't moved. She hadn't said a word since Byung-jin walked in with Bianca on his arm. Her hands were still around a stack of napkins she'd been folding, and her fingers had gone still around them, but her face hadn't cracked. Not yet. "You should be ashamed of yourself," Pierce said, and his voice didn't crack this time. "Doing this in front of us, in front of her, in her own house. If you're already feeling this in your chest, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from tonight, because this story is about to take you somewhere you didn't expect. Hit like if you're Team Estella already, and subscribe so you don't miss where this goes, because trust me, it gets so much bigger than this dinner table. Now let's get back into it." Byung-jin's jaw tightened. He hadn't planned for his children to speak first. He'd planned for silence, for his wife's composure to hold the room the way it always did, for Bianca to see exactly how much control he still had in his own home. Instead, his son was standing there, calling him out like a man twice his age, and his daughter's eyes were doing something worse than anger. They were doing disappointment. "This doesn't concern either of you," Byung-jin said, though his voice had lost some of the certainty it started with. "It concerns us the second you bring a stranger to our dinner table and act like Mum isn't standing right there," Pandora said. "It concerns us the second you decide this is how you want to treat the woman who raised us." Estella finally spoke. Her voice was quiet, even. "Both of you, sit down." "Mum, sit down," she said again, and something in the way she said it made both twins obey, though neither of them stopped watching their father like he was a stranger, wearing a mask they used to recognize. Byung-jin cleared his throat and reached for the chair at the head of the table, the one that had been his for 19 years. He didn't sit in it. He stood behind it instead, one hand resting on the back of it, and looked at his wife like he was about to deliver a verdict he'd already decided weeks ago. "I think it's time we talk honestly," he said, "about where things stand. In front of the children," Estella said. It wasn't a question. They're old enough to understand. "They're 17, Byung-jin." "Old enough," he said again, and something about the way he repeated it made Bianca shift her weight, uncomfortable now, like even she hadn't expected this part of the evening. Estella set the napkins down slowly. Her hands were steady. Whatever was happening behind her eyes, she wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of watching her fall apart in front of the woman he'd brought into her home. "Say what you came to say," she said. Byung-jin looked at her for a long moment, and there was something almost sad in his face, like a man about to do something he knew was wrong, but had already convinced himself was necessary. "I think you should move to the basement suite," he said. "Bianca will be moving in. She'll be taking over the main residence with me." The room went quiet in a way that felt physical, like the air had been pulled out of it. "You're joking," Pierce said. "I'm not." "You want Mum to move into the basement," Pandora repeated, like she needed to hear herself say it to believe it was real, in her own house, that she built, that she's lived in for 19 years. "So your mistress can move into her room." "Watch your tone," Byung-jin said. "Watch my tone?" Pandora's voice climbed, and she didn't try to bring it back down. You just told our mother to move into the basement like she's staff, like she's nothing. And you want me to watch my tone?" Estella hadn't moved. She was looking at her husband with an expression that wasn't rage, wasn't tears, wasn't any of the things a room like this usually produced. It was closer to recognition, like she was finally seeing something she'd suspected for a long time and had been too tired, too hopeful, too in love with the man he used to be to admit it out loud. "I don't find you attractive anymore," Byung-jin said, quieter now, like the words cost him something even as he said them. "I haven't for a long time, and the children don't respect me. Maybe some space will fix that." Bianca looked at the floor. Estella nodded slowly, once, like she was filing the sentence away somewhere she wouldn't forget. "You've been planning your exit for a while, haven't you?" she said. "You just needed an audience for it." Byung-jin didn't answer that. He didn't need to. The silence did it for him. Estella turned away from the table without another word and walked toward the hallway that led to the bedrooms. She didn't slam a single door, she didn't raise her voice. She moved like a woman who had already made a decision somewhere deep inside herself, long before this dinner started, and now she was simply carrying it out. Pierce was up before his sister, already heading for his own room. "I'm not staying here," he said over his shoulder. "Pandora, help me get Mum's things," Byung-jin called after them. "This is still your home. Nothing has to change for you two." Pandora stopped in the hallway and turned around, and for a second, she looked so much like her mother that Byung-jin actually flinched. "You don't get it," she said. "You think this is about the basement. It's not about the basement. It's about the fact that you looked at the woman who gave up everything for you and decided she wasn't worth protecting in her own home. We're not staying somewhere that happened." She disappeared down the hall after her brother. Bianca finally spoke, quiet, uncertain. "Maybe I should go. Let the family sort this out." "Stay," Byung-jin said, though his voice had lost the confidence it carried an hour ago. He sat down heavily in the chair at the head of the table, the one that suddenly felt too big for him, and listened to the sound of drawers opening and closing down the hall. His children packing not just their own things but their mother's too. Fast, efficient, like they'd rehearsed this moment in their heads without ever wanting to need it. In her room, Estella pulled a suitcase from the closet and started folding clothes with hands that had gone slightly unsteady now that she was alone. Pandora appeared in the doorway first, a duffel bag already over her shoulder. "We should stay," Estella said quietly, though her own hands kept moving, packing faster than her words suggested. "Give him time. This isn't like him, this." "Mum." Pandora's voice was gentle but firm, the kind of firm that comes from watching a parent give too many chances for too many years. "This is exactly like him. You just haven't let yourself see it before now. He's your father. And you're our mother," Pierce said, arriving with 2 more bags. "And we're not going to stand here and watch him do this to you again. Not tonight. Not ever again." Estella looked at her son, then her daughter, and something in her chest gave way, quiet and total, the kind of collapse that doesn't make noise. She didn't argue anymore. She let them pack the rest of her things alongside their own, and within 40 minutes, the 3 of them were in a car, heading across the city, away from the penthouse that had been home for 19 years, toward the one person Estella knew wouldn't ask her to explain herself before he opened the door. Julian answered on the second ring of the buzzer, already in his robe, already reading the situation on her face before she said a single word. "I knew it," he said, pulling her into the apartment and wrapping his arms around her, before she could even set her bag down. "I knew that man was going to do something like this eventually. Come in, all of you. I'll put the kettle on." Estella stood in his hallway, with her suitcase still in her hand, and for the first time all night, her composure cracked. Not loudly, just a slow break, tears she'd been holding back since the moment Byung-jin walked into the dining room with another woman on his arm. "I left my career for him," she said, almost to herself. "I gave up the law firm. I gave up everything he asked me to give up, and he looked at me like I was furniture he wanted to replace." "I know," Julian said, guiding her to the couch. "I know, baby, but you're out, and out is the hardest part. Everything after this, you build yourself." Pierce and Pandora sat on either side of their mother, and for a while nobody said anything else. The apartment was warm, small compared to what they'd left behind, and none of them cared. It felt safer than the penthouse had felt in years. Later, Once the twins had gone to sleep in the guest room, Julian sat across from Estella with 2 cups of tea neither of them was drinking. "I never trusted him," he said. "Not once. Not from the first dinner he took you to. There was something about the way he talked about you, like you were an achievement, instead of a person he loved. I thought I could see something in him nobody else could," Estella said quietly. "I thought if I loved him enough, stayed patient enough, he'd become the man I believed he could be. That's not love, Estella. That's a project. And you're not a contractor. You're a person who deserves someone who doesn't need fixing." She didn't answer right away. She stared into her tea, thinking about 19 years, thinking about a law degree gathering dust, thinking about 2 teenagers who'd had to grow up faster tonight than she ever wanted them to. "I don't even know what I'm supposed to do tomorrow," she admitted. "I haven't worked in years. I don't have an income. I don't have anywhere permanent to live. I have 2 kids who need stability, and I have nothing to give them right now." Julian reached over and took her hand. "You have more than you think you do. You have a law degree that doesn't expire just because you took time off. You have 2 kids who just stood up to a billionaire without blinking, which tells me exactly whose backbone they inherited. And you have me, for as long as you need." Estella managed a small, tired laugh. "You always know what to say." "I know you," Julian said simply. "That's different. That's better." The next morning, Estella woke up on Julian's couch to the sound of her phone buzzing against the coffee table. 14 missed calls from Byung-jin. She didn't return a single one. Pierce and Pandora were already up, sitting at Julian's small kitchen table, eating toast like nothing catastrophic had happened 12 hours earlier. Though the tightness around Pandora's eyes told a different story. "Did he call you too?" Pierce asked, glancing at his mother's phone. "He called everyone," Estella said, setting the phone face down. "I'm not answering until I know what I want to say." "You don't owe him anything," Pandora said. "Not an answer, not an explanation, nothing." Estella looked at her daughter for a long moment. 17 years old, and already understanding something it had taken her mother 2 decades to learn. "You're right," she said, "but I'm still going to need a job, and a place to live, and I'm still going to need to figure out how to keep both of you in school without missing a beat. None of that changes because I'm angry." Julian appeared from the kitchen with a fresh pot of coffee. "First things first. You 2 are staying here as long as you need. I have the space, and frankly, I've been dying for the company." He set the pot down and looked at Estella. "Second thing, have you thought about the bar? I haven't practiced in 9 years, Julian. Doesn't matter, your license is still active. You kept it current, remember, because you always said you might go back one day." Estella hadn't thought about that in a long time. She'd renewed her license every year, almost out of habit, never quite letting herself imagine using it again, but always unwilling to let it lapse completely. Some part of her, she realized now, had been holding a door open just in case. "It's been so long," she said. "I don't even know if anyone would take a chance on someone with a 9-year gap." "Only one way to find out," Julian said. Her mother called that afternoon, and unlike Byung-jin's calls, this one, Estella answered immediately. "I heard," her mother said before Estella could get a word out. Word traveled fast in their family. "Are you all right? Are the twins all right?" "We're safe," Estella said. "We're at Julian's. Come stay with me. I have the room, you know I do." "I know, Mum, but I need to do this on my own. I need the kids to see me stand on my own feet, not lean on someone else's." There was a pause on the line, and then her mother's voice softened. "You've always been like this, even as a girl, too proud to accept help even when it's freely given." "It's not pride," Estella said. "It's necessity. I spent 19 years depending on someone who used that dependence against me the second it was convenient for him. I'm not doing that again, not even with you." Her mother didn't argue further, though Estella could hear the worry in the silence that followed. "Just know the door is open, any time. For any reason." "I know, Mum, thank you." That evening, over dinner, Pierce brought up something that had clearly been sitting heavy on him all day. "Are we going to have to go back to school and pretend everything's normal? Because everyone's going to know. People talk." Estella set down her fork. This was the part of the situation she'd been dreading. Not the loss of her home or her marriage, but the toll it would take on her children in the small, cruel arena of their daily lives. "You don't have to pretend anything," she said. "If people ask, you can tell them the truth, or you can tell them nothing at all. Either way, there's no shame in what happened to us. The shame belongs to your father, not to you. Pandora had been quiet through most of dinner, and now she finally spoke. I keep thinking about what he said, that we don't respect him, like that's why he did this, like it's our fault somehow. It's not your fault, Estella said immediately, firmly. It was never your fault. He said that because it's easier to blame the people he hurt than to admit what he did wrong. Don't carry that, not for 1 second. I'm scared I'm going to see him and not know what to say, Pandora admitted. I'm scared I'm going to still love him even after what he did. Estella reached across the table and took her daughter's hand. You can love him and still hold him accountable. Those two things aren't opposites. I loved him for 19 years, and I'm still choosing to walk away, because love without respect isn't something worth staying inside of. You'll learn where that line is for you. I trust you to find it. Pierce, trying to lighten the mood the way he always did when things got too heavy, gave a small, tired laugh. At least Julian's cooking is better than the chef we had. Julian, setting down a fresh dish, put a hand to his chest in mock offense. Excuse me, I trained that chef. The laughter that followed was small, imperfect, but it was real, and for the first time since the night before, the apartment felt less like a place they'd fled to, and more like a place they might actually be able to build something in. Later that night, once the twins were asleep, Estella sat at Julian's kitchen table with her laptop open, staring at a blank document. She'd typed her name at the top, then deleted it, then typed it again. 9 years was a long time. The law had changed. The city had changed. She had changed. But somewhere underneath the fear, a small, stubborn part of her that had never fully gone quiet was already thinking about what came next. The following week, Estella put on the only suit she still owned that fit the way it used to, and walked into 3 different law firms with her resume in hand, each time explaining the 9-year gap with a version of the truth that didn't invite pity. She'd stepped away to raise her children. She was ready to return. Her credentials were current. 2 firms didn't call back. The third gave her a polite rejection, dressed up in corporate language, about seeking candidates with more recent litigation experience. She didn't cry about it in front of the twins. She saved that for the shower, where the water could carry away whatever she needed it to, and came out afterward, with her face composed and her voice steady enough to ask Pierce about his homework, like nothing had happened. You don't have to pretend with us, Pandora said one evening, catching her mother in a quiet moment after the 3rd rejection. We know it's hard. I'm not pretending, Estella said. I'm just choosing what to carry in front of you, and what to carry on my own. There's a difference. That sounds exhausting. It is, Estella admitted, and something about her own honesty made her smile despite everything. But so is everything worth doing. 2 weeks in, out of money faster than she wanted to admit, she took a job as a paralegal at a small firm downtown. Work well beneath what she used to do. Work that paid barely enough to cover rent on the modest apartment she and the twins had finally moved into. Her mother offered to help cover the difference. Estella refused, the way she'd refused everything else, though she allowed her mother to babysit occasionally and to bring groceries just because, which both of them understood was help disguised as affection. The firm was small, cramped, unglamorous. Estella spent her days organizing files and drafting basic paperwork for lawyers, half as sharp as she used to be, and she told herself it was temporary, a rung on a ladder she still intended to climb. It was on a Thursday afternoon, 3 weeks into the job, that a woman walked into the office for a consultation and stopped mid-sentence when she saw Estella at the front desk. Estella Idris, the woman said slowly, like she was confirming something to herself. I thought that was you. You handled the Hoban corporate dispute back in, 10 years ago. I was second chair on the opposing side. You destroyed us in that deposition. Estella blinked, momentarily thrown back into a version of herself she hadn't let herself remember in a long time. That's a long time ago, she said. You were the best I ever went up against, the woman said. What are you doing here, filing paperwork? Life happened, Estella said simply. The woman, whose name was Naomi, studied Estella for a long moment, then reached into her bag and pulled out a business card. I run my own firm now, family law, some corporate work. I've got a position that needs someone sharp, someone who knows how to read a room and win a case without losing their composure. Call me, I mean it. If you're rooting for Estella right now, drop a comment telling me who you think deserves a comeback story more than her, because I promise you, this is only the beginning. Smash that like button if you believe people can rebuild after someone tries to break them, and subscribe if you want to be here when everything changes. Now, back to the story. Estella held onto that card for 3 days before she worked up the courage to call. When she finally did, the conversation lasted 40 minutes, and by the end of it, she had an interview scheduled for the following week. She didn't tell the twins right away. She wanted to be sure it was real before she let herself hope out loud. But that night, cooking dinner in their small apartment kitchen, she found herself humming for the first time in weeks, and Pandora noticed immediately. "You're happy," Pandora said, watching her mother from the kitchen doorway. "Actually happy. What happened?" "Nothing's confirmed yet," Estella said, trying to hold back her smile and failing. "But maybe, just maybe, something good is coming. Tell me." Estella told her about the woman from the law firm, about the case a decade ago, about the business card and the phone call. Pandora's face lit up in a way it hadn't since the night they left the penthouse. "You're going back," she said. "You're actually going back to being a lawyer." "I'm interviewing," Estella corrected, though her heart was already somewhere ahead of her caution. "Nothing's guaranteed." "It's guaranteed," Pandora said, with the total confidence only a teenager, convinced of their parents' greatness, could produce. "You're the smartest person I know. Anyone would be lucky to have you." That weekend, Pierce came home from school with a different kind of energy, quieter, more withdrawn than usual. Estella noticed immediately, the way mothers do, and waited until they were alone to ask what was wrong. "Some kids at school found out about Dad and the whole thing with the woman," he said, not meeting her eyes. "They're saying stuff. About you. About us." "What kind of stuff?" "That you're only after his money. That the divorce is going to make you rich. That you probably don't even care about him, you just want what's left." Estella felt something sharp rise in her chest, not for herself, but for her son, who was carrying whispers that had nothing to do with the truth. "None of that is true," she said carefully. "I haven't asked your father for a single dollar since I left. I've been working a job that pays less than what I used to make in a month, just so I don't have to depend on anyone. Do you understand me? None of what they're saying is about who I actually am." "I know," Pierce said. "I told them that. I told them you left with nothing because you wanted nothing from him except us to be safe." Estella pulled her son into a hug, feeling him hold on to her tighter than he had in years, 17 and trying so hard to be strong for everyone around him. "You didn't have to defend me," she said softly, "but thank you for doing it anyway." "Somebody has to," Pierce said. "You've spent your whole life defending everyone else. It's our turn now." Estella got the job. The offer came the following Tuesday, a phone call that made her sit down at her kitchen table with her hand pressed against her chest, listening to a salary figure that was more than double what she'd been earning at the paralegal desk. Not what she used to make at her old firm, not yet, but enough. Enough to breathe. Enough to start rebuilding something that felt like her own life, instead of the wreckage of someone else's decisions. She started the following month, and within her first 2 weeks, she was assigned to a case that reminded her exactly why she'd loved this work, before Byung-jin convinced her it wasn't compatible with being a good wife and mother. She stayed late some nights, not out of obligation, but because the work pulled something out of her that had been dormant for 9 years, a sharpness, a hunger, a version of herself she'd missed, without fully realizing how much. The twins adjusted to their new rhythm slowly. Pierce joined the basketball team at his new school and threw himself into practice, with an intensity that Estella recognized as his way of working through anger he didn't have words for yet. Pandora, quieter in her processing, took to writing, filling notebooks with things she wasn't ready to share with anyone, not even her mother, though Estella respected the privacy of it and never pushed. Byung-jin's calls continued, though less frequently now, and Estella still didn't answer most of them. When she finally did pick up, 3 weeks after moving into the new apartment, his voice sounded different, thinner somehow, like the confidence that had carried him through their dinner table confrontation had started to erode. "I need to see the children," he said. "This has gone on long enough." "They're welcome to see you," Estella said evenly. "That's between you and them. It's not something I'll stand in the way of, and it's not something I'll force either. And us? Are we just done? 19 years, and we're just done because of one night. Estella closed her eyes for a moment before answering. It wasn't one night, Byungjin. It was 19 years of you deciding what I should give up, what I should tolerate, what I should be grateful for. That dinner was just the night I finally saw it clearly. He didn't have a response to that, and she let the silence sit until it became clear neither of them was going to fill it. She hung up gently, not out of anger, but because there was nothing left to say that hadn't already been said in the way she'd packed her bags and walked out the door weeks earlier. Meanwhile, back at the penthouse, things were unraveling in ways Byungjin hadn't anticipated. Bianca, comfortable now in her position as the woman of the house, had grown careless. She assumed his long hours at the office and his growing distraction with the fallout of his crumbling marriage meant she had the run of the place, and she used that freedom exactly the way a woman with nothing real invested in the relationship would. It started small. A man's jacket left in the hallway that Byungjin didn't recognize. A perfume that wasn't Bianca's lingering in the guest room. He told himself he was imagining things, too consumed by everything else falling apart around him to interrogate what was happening under his own roof. Then, one afternoon when he came home earlier than expected, he found the truth waiting for him in his own living room. Bianca on the couch with a man Byungjin had never seen before, both of them frozen when the front door opened, the man scrambling to gather his things, while Bianca sat there with an expression that wasn't shame, just mild inconvenience at being caught. "Get out," Byungjin said, his voice low and dangerous in a way it hadn't been even during the worst of the confrontation with his wife. "Both of you, now." "Byungjin, I said get out." The man left without another word. Bianca took her time, gathering her things with a kind of practiced calm that told Byungjin this wasn't her first time being caught in a situation like this, wasn't the first relationship she'd extracted value from before moving on to the next. "You should have seen this coming," she said as she reached the door, not even bothering to feign regret. "You threw away a good woman for someone you barely knew. What did you think was going to happen?" Byungjin stood in his own living room, alone, surrounded by the wreckage of a decision he'd made weeks earlier, convinced it was what he wanted. It took him 3 days to discover how much of his accounts Bianca had quietly moved during her time in the house. Transfers dressed up as household expenses, jewelry purchased on his cards and sold before he ever noticed, cash withdrawals he'd been too distracted to track. By the time his lawyers traced it all, she was gone, out of the country, untouchable, having extracted more from a few weeks with him than most people made in years. He sat alone in the penthouse that had once been full of his family's noise, his children's laughter, his wife's quiet competence, running every corner of the household, and for the first time since that dinner, he let himself feel the full weight of what he'd done. Not the financial loss. That he could recover from. It was the silence that undid him, the emptiness of rooms that used to hold 4 people and now held only the echo of his own footsteps. He picked up his phone and stared at Estella's contact for a long time before setting it back down without calling. It took another 2 weeks before Byungjin worked up the nerve to show up at Estella's apartment in person, uninvited, standing outside her door on a Sunday evening, with his hands in his pockets, and an expression Estella hadn't seen on him in years, something closer to the man she'd fallen in love with 2 decades earlier than the one who'd stood in their dining room, deciding she wasn't worth protecting. "You can't just show up here," she said, holding the door only partially open. "I know. I'm sorry. I just needed to see you. All of you. The kids are at Julian's for the weekend. Then can we talk? Just us. 5 minutes. Estella hesitated, then stepped aside to let him in, though her posture remained guarded, her arms crossed as she led him to the small living room that had become the center of her new, smaller, but entirely her own life. "Bianca's gone," he said before she could ask. "She took money from the accounts, a lot of it. She was never who she pretended to be." "I could have told you that," Estella said, not unkindly, just honestly. "I did tell you that, actually, years ago, when you first mentioned her name like she was just a colleague you respected." Byungjin sat down heavily on the edge of the couch, his hands clasped between his knees. "My father set this up," he said quietly. "I found out after everything fell apart. He introduced me to her years ago, encouraged the relationship, knew what she was capable of. He never respected you, Estella, not because of anything you did, because you came from nothing in his eyes, and he wanted someone who'd bring the family more standing. Estella absorbed this slowly, feeling something complicated move through her. Not quite vindication, not quite anger, something closer to a sad kind of clarity. So all of this, she said, the mistress, the humiliation, the basement, all of it, some part of it, traces back to your father wanting to replace me. Some part, Byung-jin admitted, but I made the choices. I let him plant the doubt. I let him convince me you weren't enough, when you were always more than enough. I was the one who walked into that dinner and said what I said. That's on me, not him. Estella was quiet for a long moment, watching the man across from her, the father of her children, the person she'd built 19 years of her life around. I appreciate you telling me that, she said finally. I do. But it doesn't change anything. It doesn't undo the basement, or the dinner table, or the 9 years I spent building a life around what you wanted, instead of what I needed. I know, he said. I'm not here asking you to forget it. I'm here because I don't know how to fix 19 years of mistakes in one conversation, but I want to try, if you'll let me. That's not up to just me anymore, Estella said. Pierce and Pandora have their own relationship with you to rebuild, separate from mine. If you want to try, start there. Start with them. Show them, consistently, over time, not with one apology, that you're capable of being someone worth trusting again. Byung-jin nodded slowly, though something in his face suggested he'd hoped for more than that, some path back to the family he'd broken that didn't require the long, uncertain work of earning it back one day at a time. And us? He asked quietly. Estella looked at him for a long moment, thinking of the woman she'd been at that dinner table weeks ago, silent, absorbing his cruelty, because she'd spent 19 years believing patience was the same thing as love. She wasn't that woman anymore. I don't know, she said honestly. I'm not opposed to seeing who you become, over time, if you actually put in the work. But I'm not the same woman who left that apartment. I built something without you these past 2 months. I found my career again. I found my own strength again. Whoever comes next in my life, whether it's you or someone else, they're going to have to meet me as I am now, not as the woman who used to shrink herself to keep the peace. Byung-jin left that evening, without any promises made. But something had shifted, a door not fully closed, though far from fully open either. When Pierce and Pandora returned from Julian's the next day, Estella told them about the visit, about their father's revelation regarding his own father's involvement, about Bianca's disappearance with a portion of the family's money. So he's finally realizing what he did, Pandora said, unimpressed. A little late, don't you think? Late doesn't mean meaningless, Estella said carefully, but it does mean he has a lot to prove, to both of you especially. Pierce was quiet for a moment before speaking. I want to see him, he admitted. Not because I've forgiven him, because I still love him, even though what he did was wrong. I want to know if he's actually going to change, or if this is just another performance. That's fair, Estella said. You get to decide what that relationship looks like, on your terms, at your pace. Nobody gets to rush you into forgiveness, including your father. Pandora crossed her arms, still processing. I'm not ready, she said. Maybe I will be eventually, but not yet. That's fair too, Estella said, pulling her daughter into a hug. There's no timeline for this. We heal at the pace we heal. Over the following weeks, Byung-jin began the slow, uncertain process of trying to become someone his children could trust again. He didn't send extravagant gifts or make grand gestures, not because he didn't have the means, but because Estella's words had lodged themselves somewhere deep in him. Show them, consistently, over time. He started small. He showed up to Pierce's basketball games, sitting quietly in the stands without demanding attention, without making the moment about himself. The first few times, Pierce barely acknowledged him beyond a glance across the gym. But Byung-jin kept showing up, game after game, rain or shine, sitting in the same section every time, never pushing for more than his presence allowed. By the 5th game, Pierce found himself looking for his father in the stands before the tip-off, and something in his chest loosened slightly when he saw him there, again without fail. With Pandora, the process was slower, more guarded. She wasn't interested in basketball games or public displays. What she wanted, though she didn't say it directly, was proof that her father could sit with discomfort without running from it, could hear hard truths without deflecting them, the way he had at that dinner table months ago. It was Julian, of all people, who orchestrated the first real conversation between them, inviting Byung-jin to a dinner at his apartment under the guise of a casual gathering, knowing Pandora would be there, knowing the setting was neutral enough that neither of them would feel cornered. Byung-jin arrived nervous, in a way Pandora had never seen from him before. He didn't try to fill the silence with excuses or grand declarations. He simply sat across from his daughter and said, "I know I don't deserve your trust right now. I'm not here to ask for it. I'm here because I want you to see me trying, even if it takes years before you believe it's real." Pandora studied him for a long moment, her mother's daughter through and through, unwilling to be rushed into forgiveness just because it was offered. "Why now?" she asked. "You had 19 years to be this version of yourself. Why does it take losing everything for you to finally show up?" "Because I was a coward," Byung-jin admitted, and something about the rawness of it made Pandora's guard shift, if only slightly. "I let my father's expectations shape who I thought I was supposed to be, instead of choosing who I actually wanted to be. I was afraid of disappointing him more than I was afraid of losing your mother, of losing you and your brother. That's not an excuse, it's just the truth." Pandora didn't respond right away, letting the honesty settle between them. "I'm not going to pretend everything's fine," she said finally, "but I'll give you the chance to keep showing up. That's all I can offer right now." "That's more than I deserve," Byung-jin said quietly. "But thank you." Meanwhile, Estella's career continued its steady climb. 3 months into her new position, she won a case that had seemed nearly unwinnable, a complicated custody dispute that required exactly the kind of sharp, composed argument she'd built her old reputation on. Her boss, the woman who'd recognized her that day at the paralegal firm, called her into her office afterward. "I want to make you partner," she said without preamble. "You've earned it faster than anyone I've brought on in years." Estella sat across from her, momentarily speechless. Partner, a title she'd stopped believing she'd ever hold again, back when Byung-jin convinced her that her ambition was somehow incompatible with being a good mother, a good wife. "I don't know what to say," Estella admitted. "Say yes," her boss said, smiling. "You've spent this entire time proving you never lost what made you brilliant in the first place. It was just waiting for you to remember it." Estella called her mother that evening with the news, and her mother's voice cracked with pride on the other end of the line. "I always knew," she said. "I always knew you'd find your way back to yourself." That night, sitting on the small balcony of her apartment with a cup of tea, Estella found herself thinking about how far she'd come in 3 months. Not just professionally, though that mattered more than she'd expected it to. Personally, she slept better now. She laughed more easily. She recognized herself in the mirror, in a way she hadn't in years, the sharpness in her own eyes returning slowly, steadily, like something long buried finding its way back to the surface. She thought about Byung-jin's visit, about the uncertain door she'd left open between them, and she realized she genuinely didn't know which way it would swing. She wasn't rushing toward reconciliation, and she wasn't closing the door out of spite either. She was simply living, present, engaged in her own rebuilding, letting whatever came next arrive in its own time. Pierce and Pandora, for their part, were finding their own rhythms with their father, uneven, imperfect, but real. Pierce had started meeting him for lunch once a week, conversations that were awkward at first, and gradually loosened into something closer to comfort. Pandora remained more cautious, though she'd started responding to his texts, small exchanges that felt like tentative bridges being built one plank at a time. 6 months after that first dinner, the family gathered, awkwardly and deliberately, for Pandora's birthday. Estella hosted it at her apartment, small but warm, filled with the kind of noise and laughter that had been absent from their lives during the darkest weeks of the separation. Byung-jin arrived with a gift that wasn't extravagant, a set of journals for Pandora's writing, something thoughtful rather than impressive, a sign that he'd actually been paying attention to who his daughter had become during the months of distance, rather than clinging to who he remembered her being before. "You noticed I write," Pandora said, surprised, turning the journals over in her hands. "I notice more than I used to," Byung-jin said quietly. "I have a lot of catching up to do. Julian, ever the host even in someone else's home, kept the wine flowing and the conversation light, deflecting any moments that threatened to grow too heavy with a well-timed joke or an outrageous story from his years styling Seoul's elite. Estella watched her family, fractured but present, occupying the same room without the tension that used to define every gathering, and felt something in her chest settle for the first time in months. Later in the evening, once most of the guests had left and only the immediate family remained, Byung-jin found a quiet moment to speak with Estella in the kitchen while the twins cleaned up in the living room. "Thank you for letting me be here," he said. "They wanted you here," Estella said. "This isn't about me forgiving you or not. It's about them having their father in their lives, if you're willing to keep earning that." "And you?" he asked again, the same question he'd asked months earlier, though this time his voice carried less desperation and more genuine curiosity, like a man who'd learned to sit with uncertainty instead of demanding immediate resolution. Estella considered the question carefully before answering. "I'm not the same person I was 6 months ago," she said. "I built a career again. I built confidence again. I remembered what it feels like to be someone worth choosing, not just someone who chooses everyone else first. If there's ever a version of us again, it has to be built on that person, not the version of me who shrunk herself to keep you comfortable." "I understand," Byung-jin said. "I don't expect anything. I just wanted you to know, whatever happens, I see the difference in you now. I see what I almost lost, and what I'm grateful you didn't let me completely destroy." Estella allowed herself a small smile, not quite forgiveness, not quite closure, but something honest passing between them. "We'll see," she said, "one day at a time." As the evening wound down and Byung-jin prepared to leave, Pierce walked him to the door, something he'd started doing over the past few months, their own small ritual of connection rebuilding slowly. "You did good tonight," Pierce said, "not making it weird, not trying too hard." "I'm learning," Byung-jin said, managing a small laugh. Slowly. "Yeah, well, keep learning," Pierce said, though there was warmth in his voice now that hadn't been there in the early months. "We're not going anywhere, neither is Mum, whether or not you two ever get back together. This is still your family, if you want it." Byung-jin looked at his son for a long moment, 17 years old, and already carrying wisdom that had taken his father 4 decades and a shattered marriage to begin to grasp. "I want it," he said, "more than anything." After Byung-jin left, Estella found Pandora sitting on the balcony with one of her new journals open on her lap, pen moving steadily across the page. "You writing about tonight?" Estella asked, joining her daughter outside. "Maybe," Pandora said, closing the journal with a small, private smile. It felt like something worth remembering, not because everything's fixed, because it's not fixed, and we're all still here anyway, trying. Estella sat beside her daughter, looking out over the city lights that had become their new, smaller, but entirely their own view. "That's the whole thing, isn't it?" she said. "Trying. Nobody gets everything perfect. You just keep showing up, keep choosing honesty over comfort, and see what gets built from that." A year passed, marked by the slow, steady accumulation of small moments that mattered more than any single grand gesture could have. Estella made partner at her firm, her name added to the letterhead alongside the woman who'd recognized her potential when Estella had barely recognized it in herself. She moved into a bigger apartment, not because she needed to prove anything, but because she and the twins had earned the space to breathe a little more comfortably. Pierce's basketball season ended with a championship, his father in the stands for every single game, cheering loud enough to embarrass his son in exactly the way fathers were supposed to. Their weekly lunches had grown into something closer to friendship, conversations that ranged from college applications to the kind of ordinary father-son talk that had felt impossible a year earlier. Pandora's relationship with Byung-jin remained more measured, though it had grown too, built on the foundation of small, consistent efforts rather than dramatic reconciliation. She'd filled 3 journals by then, and one evening, without much fanfare, she handed one of them to her father, a section she'd marked with a small paperclip. "You can read that part," she said, "if you want to understand where I've been." Byung-jin read it slowly, sitting across from his daughter, at a coffee shop they'd started meeting at every other weekend. It was an honest accounting of the pain of that dinner, the humiliation, the fear, the slow rebuilding of trust. He finished it with tears in his eyes he didn't bother hiding. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know I've said it before. I don't think I can say it enough times to undo what I did. But I'm sorry, and I'm grateful you're still willing to let me try." "I am too," Pandora said quietly. "Grateful, I mean, that we're here instead of somewhere worse." As for Estella and Byung-jin, their relationship existed in a careful, undefined space, neither fully closed nor fully reopened. They spoke occasionally, mostly about the twins, sometimes about deeper things when the conversation allowed for it. He'd stopped pushing for more than she was ready to give, having finally understood, months into his own slow transformation, that trust wasn't something owed to him simply because he wanted it back. One evening, at an event for Pandora's school, where both parents were expected to attend, Estella found herself standing beside Byung-jin during a quiet moment, watching their daughter accept an award for a piece of writing she'd submitted, the very same journal entries that had started as private processing and grown into something she was brave enough to share with the world. "She's remarkable," Byung-jin said quietly, watching Pandora at the podium. "She always was," Estella said. "She just needed the space to become fully herself. We all did." Byung-jin glanced at her, something searching in his expression. He asked, not with desperation this time, but with genuine, gentle curiosity. Estella considered the question longer than she had the last time he'd asked it. She thought about the year behind her, about the woman she'd rebuilt herself into, about the growth she'd watched in the man standing beside her, uncertain but real. "I'm not there yet," she said honestly, "but I'm not opposed to finding out anymore." It wasn't a promise. It wasn't a rejection either. It was simply the truth of where she stood, open enough to possibility, without abandoning the strength she'd fought so hard to reclaim. Byung-jin nodded, accepting the answer without pushing for more. And together, they watched their daughter finish her speech, the applause filling the auditorium, Pierce whooping loudly from a few rows back, embarrassing his sister exactly the way brothers were supposed to. After the ceremony, the four of them, Estella, Byung-jin, Pierce, and Pandora, stood together in the lobby, a family reshaped but not broken, imperfect but present, each of them carrying the scars of that dinner table months ago alongside the strength they'd built in its aftermath. "Ice cream?" Pierce suggested. "To celebrate. All of us?" Pandora asked, glancing between her parents. Estella looked at Byung-jin, and something passed between them, an unspoken agreement that this small, ordinary moment mattered more than either of them wanted to admit. "All of us," Estella said. They walked out into the evening together, the four of them, no fanfare, no grand declaration of reconciliation, just a family finding its way back to something resembling normal, one small choice at a time. At the ice cream shop, Byung-jin insisted on paying, and for once, Estella let him, understanding that some gestures, however small, were his way of trying to give back a fraction of what he'd taken. They sat at a small table, the twins bickering good-naturedly about flavors, and for a moment, watching her children laugh, watching the careful, tentative peace between herself and the man she'd once built a life with, Estella allowed herself to simply exist in the moment, without overanalyzing what it meant for the future. Later that night, after dropping the twins back at the apartment, Byung-jin walked Estella to her door, the same door he'd shown up at uninvited months earlier, desperate and undone. Tonight he stood there differently, calmer, more patient, a man who'd learned, slowly and painfully, what it meant to earn something, instead of demanding it. "Thank you for tonight," he said, "for letting me be part of it. Thank you for showing up the way you have," Estella said, consistently, without expecting anything in return. He nodded, turning to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth," he said, "whatever you decide, about us, I mean, I'm not going anywhere. Not from the kids, and not from trying to be someone worth your consideration, even if that takes years." Estella watched him, and something in her chest, some old ache she'd carried since that dinner table over a year ago, loosened just slightly. She closed her door and leaned against it for a moment, thinking about how far she'd come, a partner at her firm, a mother whose children respected her, not out of obligation, but out of genuine admiration for the way she'd rebuilt herself from nothing. A woman who no longer needed anyone's approval to know her own worth. Her phone buzzed. A text from Julian. "How was the ice cream date with the whole family? Don't leave me in suspense." Estella smiled, typing back. It was good. Complicated, but good. And Byung-jin? Julian pressed. Any movement on that front? Estella paused before responding, thinking about his words at the door, about the year of careful, consistent effort, about her own answer to his question that evening at Pandora's award ceremony. I'm not there yet, but I'm not opposed to finding out anymore. Ask me again in a few months, she typed finally. I'm not rushing anything. Not this time. She set her phone down and walked to the window, looking out over the city that had become the backdrop of her rebuilding, thinking about the woman she used to be at that dinner table, silent, absorbing humiliation, because she believed patience was love. She wasn't that woman anymore, and whatever came next, with Byung-jin or without him, she was building it from a place of strength this time, not fear. 3 days later, she got a call from her lawyer regarding the finalized divorce paperwork, ready for her signature, the last formal thread connecting her to 19 years of a marriage that had nearly cost her everything before teaching her how to find herself again. She stared at the documents for a long time before picking up the pen, and then, just as she was about to sign, her phone rang. Byung-jin's name lit up the screen, and beneath it, a text that had come through moments before the call. Before you sign anything, there's something about my father you need to know. Something that changes everything. Please, just 5 minutes. Estella's hand hovered over the paperwork, pen still uncapped, her heart suddenly pounding in a way it hadn't in months. She picked up the phone. What is it? She said quietly. That couldn't wait until after I signed. The line was silent for a moment, and when Byung-jin finally spoke, his voice carried something new, something that sounded less like regret and more like fear. My father didn't just orchestrate the introduction to Bianca, he said. There's a reason he wanted you gone from this family so badly, and it's not about where you came from. It's about something he did 19 years ago, before you and I ever met, something that connects directly to why you left the law the first time. I think you need to sit down for this. Estella lowered the pen slowly, the signed line still empty, her entire understanding of the last 19 years, suddenly, terrifyingly, up for question. If you want to know what Byung-jin's father did 19 years ago, and why it's about to change everything Estella thought she knew about her own life, you already know what to do. Drop a comment telling me if you saw this coming, hit subscribe so you'll hear the moment part 2 drops, and let me know down below what you think his father is hiding. This story isn't over, not even close.